We are going to solve polynomial equations in factored form. You've learned how to factor, so we're going to use that concept to solve the equations in this section. One of the first things that you need to know about is the zero product property. You all should realize that if you have two numbers multiplied together, A and B, and they equal 0, then either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. If you're multiplying two things together and you get 0 for an answer, one of the two numbers has to be 0. We're going to use that idea for ourselves in solving these equations using factors. So we're going to start out with a squared plus 5a equals 0. And when we first started factoring, we did GCF. So let's pull a GCF out of the equation on the left-hand side. We know that a is the GCF between a squared and 5a, and we're left with an a plus 5 as our factorization. And we're going to have it equal to 0. In order to solve in factored form, we must have it equal to 0 on the other side. Now the deal is, we've told you that a times a plus 5, if that's equal to 0, that means that either this a has to equal 0 or this a plus 5 has to equal 0. You have a monomial factor, the a, has to equal 0, or the binomial factor, a plus 5, has to equal 0. Well, I can't do anything more on this a equals 0, so that's one of my answers. And on this other equation, I need to solve for a, and I find out that a equals 5. So I actually have two answers to this problem. A can be 0, or a can be negative 5. Well, let's check to see if that actually works. 0 squared plus 5 times 0 equals 0. Yeah, that looks pretty good there. 0 equals 0. 0 equals 0. True statement. How about negative 5 squared plus 5 times negative 5 equals 0. So I'm substituting in the other number. That's a positive 25 minus 25 equals 0. Looks like 0 equals 0 on that one too. Both of those answers work in our equation. You can have two answers. Let's look at another problem. Maybe you got 3x squared minus 9x equals 0. First thing in factoring, always pull out a GCF if you can. Think about what GCF can you take out of there? 3x. And when we divide by 3x on each of those terms, we get x minus 3 as our binomial that's left. So I've got this monomial, 3x, that I'm going to set equal to 0. And I've got this binomial, x minus 3, that I'm going to set equal to 0. Well, on the first equation, when I divide by 3 on both sides, I get x equal to 0. That happens when there is a monomial factor. Okay, this is a monomial factor, and you're going to get 0 for an answer on those. This other one is a binomial factor. And when we have a binomial factor, you actually have to solve the equation. So x minus 3 equals 0. X is going to equal a positive 3. So I've got these two answers, 3 and 0. If you want to write it as x equals 0 comma 3, like this, that's fine. You have two answers. Both of them work in the original problem, and you can even check to make sure they both work. I am not going to require that you do so. Well, let's do one more here. 3x squared plus 18x equals 6. Think about what your GCF is that you're taking out. Yeah, 3x, that'll leave us with x plus 6 equal to 0. Set 3x equal to 0. Set x plus 6 equal to 0. That means we have x equals 0 and x equal a negative 6. Two answers for that problem. If your terms are not all on the same side, you need to move them. So I would make this 4y squared minus 14y equal to 0. You must have 0 on one side of the equal sign. So then let's pull out our GCF. Think about what can come out of both of those terms. 2y comes out of both of them, so I'll have 2y minus 7 equals 0. Again, I have a monomial factor, 2y, so I'll set that 2y equal to 0. And the binomial factor is 2y minus 7 equals 0. On the first equation, pretty easy to divide by 2 on both sides, y equals 0. On the second equation, it's a two-step problem. So I'm going to get 7 over 2 as an answer. I will accept 7 over 2. You want to write it as 3.5. That's fine. You want to write it as 3.5. I don't care. But just pick one and go with it, please. 7 over 2, as long as it's in lowest terms and proper fraction, I will take. But there are two answers to this problem. Another problem where we need to get 0 on one side. Think about what you're going to do here. You got 4x squared. Subtract the 2x equal to 0. I must have 0 on one side. Then pull out your GCF. 2x. That leaves us with 2x minus 1 equal to 0. Set 2x equal to 0. Set 2x minus 1 equal to 0. And find out that x equals 0. 2x equals 1. X equals 1/2. And yes, I can have fractions for answers too. Positive numbers, negative numbers, decimals, fractions. It's okay. What if it's already factored for you? Do you know how to solve it? Look at this. We've got a binomial factor and a binomial factor. X minus 2 times x plus 5 equals 0. That means either x minus 2 has to equal 0 or x plus 5 has to equal 0. I could solve both of those. X equals 2, x equals a negative 5. My two answers there. You might be wondering, how do I get there? You already know how to do that. Let's say that you've got x squared minus 3x equals 28. Well, we don't have one side equal to 0, so let's change that. So it's x squared minus 3x minus 28 equals 0. Now we have a trinomial that we know how to factor. We're going to put down our two sets of parentheses equals 0 on the other side. We already know this is x and x in our binomials. Now we have to think about what factors of negative 28 add up to be negative 3. Well, I've got 1 in 28. I got 2 in 14. 3 go in there? No. 4 go in there? Yes. 7. It's got to be a negative 28, and when I add them up, they've got to have a negative 3. That means that I need that negative sign on my bigger number. So I'm looking at 4 and negative 7 for my two numbers to substitute into my binomials. Now I set those binomials equal to 0 because those two multiplied together equal 0. So one of the two of them has to be 0. So I'm going to have x equal negative 4 and x equal positive 7 as my two answers. Let's do x squared minus 2x equals 24. Think about what do we need to do in order to get this problem started. I hope you're thinking that you got to move that 24 over so that you have equals 0. And then set up your two binomials because it's a trinomial. X and x, negative 24. What two numbers multiplied together give me negative 24, but added together give me negative 2. It's going to be a minus 6 and a positive 4. So I'm going to set that x minus 6 equals to 0, x plus 4 equals 0. So I get x equals a positive 6 and x equals a negative 4 for my two answers. What if you have something that looks a little more complicated like this one? You got 2x cubed minus 18x squared equals negative 36x. Well, to start out with, we need everything on one side and 0 on the other. So let's move that negative 36x over to the left so that we have 0 on the right. Then we say, is there a GCF? Absolutely. I can take a 2 and an x out of all three of those. That leaves me with an x squared, a 9x, and and 18 equal to 0. Now I have a trinomial inside my parentheses, and I can factor that trinomial. You've learned how to do that. You look at what factors of positive 18 add up to be a negative 9. We're looking at x minus 3 and x minus 6 equal to 0. Again, now I have three things multiplied together that give me 0. So that means either 2x equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 6 equals 0. On this first one, I get 0 for an answer. On the second one, I have a positive 3, and the third one is a positive 6. I actually have 3 answers to this one. How did I know that I would have 3 answers? Take a look at the degree of this polynomial. It was a cubic polynomial to the 3rd degree. So it tells me that I'm going to have 3 answers to this problem. All right, let's do another one that's to the 3rd power. They're all on the one side, they got 0 on the other. Hey, we can take a c out, and that leaves us with c squared minus 7c plus 12 equal to 0. When we factor the polynomial, we have to think about the factors of 12 that add up to be negative 7. That will be a negative 3 and a negative 4. So I'm going to set c equal to 0, c minus 3 equal to 0, c minus 4 equals 0. I can solve these two. This first one, I didn't need to solve any further. It was already c equal to 0. Now we have to throw into this, what if we get something like 9x squared minus 25 equals 0? Do you recognize that? Remember, a squared minus b squared factors into a plus b and a minus b. So if I've got 9x squared, square root of 9x squared is 3x. I'm going to put 3x here and 3x here. I also need the square root of 25. I know that's 5 and 5. One of these is addition, one of these is subtraction, and it's equal to 0. So that means I'm going to set 3x plus 5 equal to 0, 3x minus 5 equal to 0. So the first one, when I solve this, I get my negative 5 on there, x equals negative 5/3. And on the second one, 3x equals a positive 5, so x equals a positive 5/3. I have 2 fractions. I'm going to leave them in improper. You want to write them as negative 1 2/3, positive 1 2/3, fabulous. Please do not write them as a decimal that is rounded. It says nothing here about rounding your answers. So leave them as negative 5/3 and positive 5/3. We can also have a trinomial that is that perfect square trinomial. Remember, a squared minus 2ab plus b squared factors into a minus b, quantity squared. So I'm looking at 16x squared, the square root of that is 4x. 25, the square root of that is 5. If I multiply those two together times 2, I get the 40x in the middle. So I can write this as 4x minus 5, quantity squared equals 0. Now, this is really 4x minus 5 times 4x minus 5. That's longhand of writing that. But we write shortcut with that squared. That means I'm going to set 4x minus 5 equal to 0 and solve. 4x equals a positive 5, therefore x equals 5/4. If you want, x equals 1.25, that's fine. But the deal is, if I set this one right here, would it be any different if I set that one equal to 0 as well? Please notice, I get the same answer. I'm not going to write answer as 1.25 and 1.25. There's only one answer that can be given, and that is x equals 1.25. Now you might say, Mrs. Deacon, I thought you said there'd be 2 answers to this one because it's a degree of 2. It's a quadratic. It can have up to 2 answers, and this one has repeated factors, so there's only one answer. Good luck on your homework in factoring and then setting your factors equal to 0.